Hi everybody, and welcome to Meditation Monday. And I want to start the story of Rebekah. Rebekah is not someone I want to do in one video because there's sort of the pre-meeting Isaac, and then becoming his wife, and then becoming a mother. And I think both of those stories are really important and intertwined, but I want to divide them up. So my story today is about Rebekah. So to back it up, if you remember, Abraham is the father of Isaac, and Abraham had a brother named Nahor. And back in those days, it was very common for families to marry within families. So Nahor had children of his own, and then those children had children, etc., just like we do today. But what would happen sometimes is the children of Abraham, as they got older, might go to the children of Nahor and his family and marry within. They didn't think it was a bad thing back then. It's different for us in this culture today. You know, you don't see that very often. I mean, if you see family members marry, it's usually cousins that are way far removed, and even then not very common. But back then it was very, very common. And in fact, in this story, we kind of have to talk a little bit about Abraham, because if you remember, Abraham and Sarah were very old when Isaac was born, and Sarah lived to be 127, and Isaac would have just been about 27, maybe 30 years old when she was passing away. When she passed away, and then Abraham started to come up in years, and he wanted to make sure that Isaac married within the family. He didn't want him to marry the Canaanites. The Canaanites were the people who occupied the land that God had said to Abraham, I'm going to give you this land, and you're going to be the father of many nations, etc., etc. And they had a lot of different cultural customs that Abraham didn't approve of. So he wanted to be sure that Isaac married within his family. Now, there's obviously a lot more to the story than that. If you really want to dig deep and find out, you know, what was the culture, what was the Canaanites, and what was the deal with them. But I want to get to the story of Rebekah. So anyways, so Abraham says to his main servant, and remember, Abraham had many, many riches. You know, he was not a poor man by any means. He had, besides Sarah, you know, he had lots and lots of different maidservants, and they had kids, and etc., etc. And after Sarah died, Abraham actually married again another woman named Keturah. But anyway, so Abraham calls his main servant to him, and he says, I want you to go and find a wife for my son. This was also one of the cultural customs of the day, that often marriages were arranged. And Abraham was so insistent that Isaac marry someone from their family that he sent his servant to go find the right person. Now, fortunately for Isaac, this servant obviously believed, like Abraham did, believed in God, because it references the fact that this servant prays to God along the way, along the journey to go where he needs to go to find this wife. He prays to God quite often and asks God for his guidance in making sure that he could find the right person. So the servant says to Abraham, well, what if I go there and I find someone and then they don't want to come? And he says, well, then you'll be released from this oath that I'm asking of you. And he goes, do you want Isaac to go there? And he says, absolutely no, I don't want Isaac to go there. So he obviously had some kind of a reason why, probably felt like Isaac would just go see somebody beautiful and that would be it, you know, or see Canaanites along the way, or who knows. So anyway, so he says, don't send Isaac. He goes, if you can't find somebody, you know, in the family, then you're released from the oath, and then I guess it'll just be what it is. Now, I'm pretty confident that the reason why Abraham wanted to stay within the family is because he had raised Isaac to believe in God and believe God. And, you know, I know it seems strange, but there were many, many countries and cultures and things that believed in a higher power, but they didn't understand the God of Israel. They knew that Israel had a God that they prayed to and, you know, and heard the stories, but they didn't truly understand God like we do. This is actually borne out in New Testament scripture as well, where it talks a lot about how the Gentiles, you know, they had their gods that they made. You know, Paul even had to go to Mars Hill and explain to them, you know, there's one God, the God. Anyway, to get back to this though, the servant sets out to go find a wife for Isaac, and he goes to his family of his brother Nahor. And he figures that's the best place to go because Nahor and Abraham are brothers. They were very close. Their kids would have been, you know, relatively the same age, so to speak, because, you know, as I said, Abraham had Isaac later in life. However, that would be a good place to go too, because Nahor's kids would have had kids, would have, you know, and they've all grown up and whatnot. And so some of them would have been more Isaac's age, because Isaac was young relative. You know, you think about it, his mother died at 127 and Isaac was only about 27, 30, 32, I don't know, somewhere in that area, 37 maybe. He was young, in other words, compared to his mother's age. So he goes there, and along the way, he's praying and he's saying, you know, help me know who the right person's going to be. So he comes to the town where Abraham's brother and family live, and there's a custom back then that the women would collect water. And there were certain times of the day that water had to be collected, because not only did they have to have water for the families, they had to have water to feed the animals. And back then, livestock was a huge thing, you know. So lots and lots of water was necessary. And there was, you know, the rivers and different things. So they had wells, lots and lots of wells in that area. And so they would go to the well and pull the water up out of the well and then bottle it up or jug it up or however they packaged it, and then they would take it back to their homes and feed their family or use it for their families and their animals. So there was a certain time. So he says to God, please do this. If I ask for water and the woman offers me water, but also offers to water my camels, let her be the one that you want for Isaac. So you see that he was extremely dependent on God to make sure that this woman was going to be the right choice. So about that time, the women start to come, and the Bible describes Rebekah this way. It does say that she was very beautiful. It seems that, you know, who knows what beauty is, and it's in the eye of the beholder, of course, but it seems like everybody that you read about in the Bible was good looking. Sarah was good looking, and, you know, all of this and that. So anyway, it says she was beautiful, that she was young enough to still be a virgin. It does mention that, you know, she had never had sexual relations with anyone. And so she was relatively young. I don't know how old, but she was young. And anyway, so she comes, and for some reason he approached her and he said, you know, would you bring me some water? She says, not only will I bring you water, but I'll bring water for your camels. So there it is. So, you know, of course, the servant wants to be double, triple sure. Is this God, you know, answering his prayer like he had hoped he would? So he waits and he watches her, and he sees that, yeah, she follows through, and he gives him his water, but also gives the water for all of his camels. And let me just say, pulling water out of a well is not an easy task. For those of you that have ever pulled water out of a well, I used to have relatives that had a well, and when I was a little kid, I lived next to some neighbors that had a farm, and they had a well, and it's not an easy thing to pull water out of a well. Well, she was pulling water out of the well, not only for him and for others, but for the camels, which take a lot of water. There's one reference I found that said that she probably pulled, multiple gallons, maybe 75 gallons. I don't know about that, but I do know it was a lot. Camels need far more than humans do. Anyway, so he approaches her and he says to her, "Can I talk to you for a minute? I come from your family's home with Abraham." And he explains to her the whole thing, how Abraham had asked him to go to the family, that he didn't want Isaac to marry anybody outside the family, that he had asked God to show him a sign, and that Rebekah had done everything that he had prayed to God about. She was so excited. She says, "Oh, please come home with me, come meet come see the family, whatnot." So he gets to the family, and Laban, who is related to Nahor, I think it was probably one of his sons, he comes out, and so he's, the servant relays the whole story again to him, and they said, "Of course, but before you just take her back, can we please have a few days?" Like, in other words, basically, we want to process what's going on here, because you're basically going to take our child and leave. And if she was still a virgin, that means she was very young. And so, I'm sure that was very hard for them to go to a land she'd never been to meet family she'd never met, to get married to a man she'd never met. I mean, she doesn't know what he looks like. She doesn't know, is he nice? Is he mean? Is he old? Is he young? She doesn't really know a lot about him. But I believe in my heart that they had raised those kids also to believe in God to whatever extent. And so she trusted that and said, and so the family says, "Well, can she stay for 10 days? And the servant says, "Well, can we just get on the road, because I need to get back to my master, because now I found someone and I just want to get back to her." And they said, "Well, let's leave it up to her." Leaving it up to her is very unusual, because back in those days, most women, those decisions were made for them. But they wanted her to feel comfortable with the whole situation. And they went to her and asked her, or he went to her and asked her, and she said, "Yep, let's go." And so she didn't even hesitate. I don't know if it was because she was young, and sometimes when you're young and you're going to go on a trip, you're excited and you're thinking, "Woo," who knows what emotions she went through along the way to get when she got there, because they get there, and the servant goes through the whole story again and introduces her to Isaac. And apparently it must have been love at first sight, because what all the Bible says is that he took her into his mother's tent and married her. And that was that. And there were some customs with that as well. Taking your future wife into your mother's tent, especially since his mother had passed and he was very close to her, meant a lot. It meant that he was welcoming his new bride, and she was part of the family. Also, he married her, meaning, back then they didn't have big weddings and well, I suppose they could have, but the whole shebang, like, basically they said, "Yeah, we're going to get married in the eyes of God," and that was it. And then he had relations with her, so she wasn't a virgin anymore. She was basically his. And it stops right there. And the next time we pick up is when she's going to be having kids. So on my next video, I want to pick up where we talk about Rebekah as a mother, because there's a whole big story about that one too. I'm so glad that you're joining us for these Meditation Mondays. I hope it gives you a little reprieve out of your day to just sit, think about, the Lord, the trust that Sarah had in God, the trust that she had to just go to a new place where she knew no one, but just felt like, this is what I'm supposed to do. I mean, if this is how much trouble somebody went to have me as his wife, then I guess this is what it's supposed to be. Left her family, went to a new place. I mean, that's pretty incredible trust, wouldn't you say? And it makes us kind of wonder today, how much trust do we do? I mean, we don't, can you even imagine if somebody arranged a marriage for you? Could you imagine, knowing that when you get to the end of the journey, you're going to marry, not maybe, not sort of, you will marry a person you have never even laid eyes on. They didn't have cameras, they didn't have selfies, they didn't have internet. She had no idea what he was going to look like or what he was going to be like. I mean, he could have been mean, we don't know. So, or she didn't know. So her trust was amazing. She didn't care. It wasn't about, and by the way, it wasn't about them being together because they both looked great. Even though it mentions that Rebekah was beautiful and Isaac was good looking, that isn't why they were together. They were together because that's how God wanted it to be. And because the servant depended on God, and Abraham wanted what God wanted. That's why this union worked, not because of how they looked or because of what they had. She hadn't, like I said, she really had no inkling about, I'm sure the servant probably told her things along the journey getting back there, but up until that point, she didn't really know, didn't even know what he looked like. So anyway, that's that. I'm, again, glad that you joined us, and I hope you have a wonderful week ahead. We'll see you next Monday in a brand new year. Peace and love.